We'd all like deeply considered policy and informed debate to be at the heart of politics, but unfortunately controversies and scandals tend to steal the show. In part, it's our fault. It's the insatiable appetite of us in the media for drama. But it's also all of us. When we have a million things competing for our attention, scandals are one of the few things that cut through, that shake us out of that scrolling stupor and get us to actually care about an issue. For most parties, scandals are disastrous. They lose seats, ministers and even elections. But not One Nation.
One Nation leader Pauline Hanson has sparked outrage in the Senate, walking in wearing a clothing item worn by Muslim women.
Pauline Hanson has been censured by the Senate and banned from the chamber for the 7th.
Pauline Hanson has now been referred to the Australian Federal Police under Labor's federal hate speech laws. The AFP says
this is a party that doesn't just survive the chaos, it creates it, it capitalises on it. Scandals are part of its DNA. I'm Ashlyn McGee from The Conversation in Australia, and this is The Making of One Nation, Episode 3, Survive a Scandal. Jordan McSweeney, you're at the University of Canberra researching far-right parties and the scandals that plague them. How many times have you thought One Nation was done?
To be honest, never really, right? Because I don't think the scandals are necessarily a negative for the party. Really, scandals tend to actually work in the party's favour. I guess starting off with the big one was in 2003.
We begin with the verdict, which has found Pauline Hanson guilty of electoral fraud and immediately...
Pauline Hanson was convicted and briefly went to prison for electoral fraud. That charge was overturned. One of the other big ones is in 2017, the party was investigated by the Australian Electoral Commission for failing to properly declare flights on a plane owned by James Ashby, who of course is today the Chief of Staff for Hanson. On top of that, you've got things like the 2018 secret recording of James Ashby.
There's an opportunity for us to make some money on this if we play this smart.
Suggesting that One Nation should deliberately overcharge its candidates at the Queensland state election for electoral materials. In 2019, probably the other big one was the party was revealed to have been seeking funds from American pro-gun groups like the National Rifle Association in exchange for watering down Australia's post-Port Arthur massacre gun laws.
Pauline Hanson is facing what could be the toughest week of her political career as the firestorm over the gun lobbying sting continues to engulf her party.
A bit more recently, I guess, there's been the defamation battle with the Green Senator Marine Faruqi, which Hanson lost, and a federal court judge found that Hanson had engaged in racial discrimination against her fellow senator. And then on top of all of that, there is the fact that One Nation has basically lost all of its parliamentarians to splits and divisions and very public falling outs with Hanson. After the 2016 federal election, Rod Cullerton, Brian Burston, Fraser Anning all broke with the party, all following disputes. Burston quite famously got into a scuffle with James Ashby in the Great Hall of Parliament and ended up smearing his blood on the door of Hanson's parliamentary office, which is one of the weirder things to have happened.
Whilst I do not recall the incident of blood on the door, I now have come to the conclusion that it was myself, and I sincerely apologise for that action.
And then I guess the most high-profile one is, of course, the former ALP leader Mark Latham and his fellow One Nation New South Wales MLC Rod Roberts, again resigning the party again after falling out with Hanson. Every time they get a few people elected, bang, there tends to be a split with Hanson. They all fall out and the party loses its representation in Parliament, not because they've lost seats at an election necessarily, but because of, internal disagreements. And yet, at the same time, I say, in a way, none of this has mattered, right? It hasn't really put a dent in Hanson's popularity. It hasn't really mattered in terms of the party's appeal to its supporters.
When you list them all like that, it sounds like an awful lot. How does it compare to other minor parties?
It's incomparable. I can't really think of another political party that has such a sort of history of dysfunction and such high-profile blow-ups. I mean, people resign parties and leave parties not infrequently, like Fatima Payman and Lydia Thorpe, for example, splitting with their respective parties. But the sensationalist blow-up of the relationship and the ongoing point scoring and certainly getting into a scuffle in the Great Hall of Parliament with the Chief of Staff and smearing your blood on the door, that just has not happened with anyone else.
So what is it about One Nation then? Why do they keep doing this?
if you listen to what the people who have split from the party, resigned from the party say, the reoccurring theme is essentially a disagreement with how Pauline Hanson and her close circle run the party.
Fraser Anning has just been sworn in for One Nation, and in breaking news, he has now left One Nation literally less than half an hour after he was sworn in. The reasons at this stage...
Whether that's down to a clash of egos, people think they should be running the show, people are genuinely dissatisfied with the way Hanson runs the party, whether this is perhaps a simple way of capturing a bunch of other grievances with how the party operates, it's not entirely clear. We don't really get a lot more than, well, I fell out with Hanson and so I've left the party. But that tends to be the reoccurring theme. Hanson is sort of at the centre of a lot of those splits and defections.
So if another party went through these kinds of scandals, I mean, we've seen other parties in Australia go through smaller versions of these scandals. Most of them don't survive them, do they?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think most other political parties, if they were recorded on secret video promising to water down Australia's gun laws, for example, in exchange for foreign money, that would be a pretty high-profile scandal, and can't really imagine parties sort of bouncing back from that, and certainly not bouncing ahead like One Nation has these days looking at the polls, right? So what is it about One Nation that allows it to weather these storms? I mean, in the same way that I think perhaps Hanson is at the centre and the cause of these storms, she's also the reason, in some respects, I think they're able to survive them, right? Hanson is so central to the party's brand and becomes such an anchor for the party that even as former candidates and members fall away because of Hanson, her unprecedented brand recognition, her sort of media profile, and her continuity on the kind of core issues that matter for One Nation, like immigration, seem to allow them to just sort of shrug this stuff off. Maybe it's got something to do with the fact that Hanson just won't own up to them, won't apologise for them, is completely defiant, typically will reframe any of these scandals as, targeted attacks by, elite media. In a way, it sort of feeds into a broader self-sustaining cycle where parties like One Nation and Pauline Hanson, they constantly are transgressing norms to, I guess, generate media attention and public outrage as well. But then they reframe this as, we're fighting elite oppression, they're coming for our free speech. And that in itself becomes kind of self-perpetuating and helps them entrench their support and generate further support.
So, Jordan, I think time to fess up here. I remember 10 years ago when I was in the press gallery in Canberra and there was that incident around who'd paid for Pauline Hanson's plane. And if I'm really honest, we all kind of rolled our eyes a bit and went, here we go again. And I just wonder, we probably don't have that approach to other politicians. And I think when there's this whole storm of scandals, do you think there's this sort of collective haze that descends on the media a bit? Like essentially, scandal just becomes normalised, right?
Look, I'm not a journalist, but I'm sure there's definitely some fatigue in reporting on this seemingly never-ending cycle of splits, defections, scandals, other controversial things that One Nation has done. It probably does get a bit monotonous. And I think that monotony is useful for One Nation because it stops these things seeming so scandalous, seeming so contentious. It just sort of seems like an everyday normal part of politics now, which I don't think is necessarily healthy for the quality of political debate in this country. But, we sort of run out of things to be surprised at in a way. And so the reporting on scandals and things like that, it loses its edge because it's all happened before.
I'm Gemma Ware, host of the Conversation Weekly podcast. Each week, I speak to an academic expert about a topic in the news to understand how we got here. From global politics.
World War II has this very long shadow in all of East Asia because there's a lot of unfinished business.
To the latest scientific breakthroughs.
The drug has been shown in real-world environments to be highly effective at preventing HIV.
Or the big dilemmas facing our planet.
We have actually stumbled in the last few decades into a system where those products that we rely on for the economy to be sold every day are polluting. And they're polluting things very badly indeed.
My guests draw on their deep research knowledge to pull out what really matters so that you can understand the context without the spin. Follow The Conversation Weekly for new episodes every Thursday wherever you listen to podcasts and read more stories direct from academic experts every day on theconversation.com.
Welcome back. Jordan, is there a strategy here, or is it that the party is kind of rolling with things as they come up?
There's definitely a strategy, right? The party has often employed really provocative stunts as a way to attract media attention. So the 2017 burqa stunt, the 2025 burqa stunt.
Senator, I'm not going to pretend to ignore the stunt you have tried to pull today by arriving in the chamber dressed in a burqa when we all know you are not an adherent of the Islamic faith.
But this isn't new either. You know, we go back to Hanson's first stint in Parliament in 96 to 7. You might remember the famous pre-recorded message in case Hanson was ever assassinated.
Fellow Australians, if you are seeing me now, it means I have been murdered.
These kinds of things are basically an attempt to capture media attention and stay in the headlines. And also, particularly with things like the burqa stunt, try and shift the focus of the national conversation to one nation's preferred issues. And this is generally reasonably successful because it broadly aligns with the desire among at least a large section of the media for spectacle and controversy and sensationalist sort of reporting. And so again, this kind of self-sustaining cycle where Pauline Hanson does something transgressive, it generates media attention and outrage. Other political parties and political leaders will condemn her for it. She might face formal censure and things like that. These consequences, as light as they are really, are then reframed as Hanson's fighting the elite oppression, she's sticking up for the people and keep her supporters energised. I think there's often comparisons with the Republican Party under Trump, Reform UK and Farage and things like that. I think, though, I always find it difficult, the framing that it's always Australia's learning from overseas. We're actually, I think, in many ways, we're sort of a bit of a net exporter, right? Certainly some of the policy suggestions that Hanson has come up with in terms of addressing immigration, putting surveillance cameras in mosques, et cetera, she's been arguing for this kind of stuff a lot longer and well before Farage and Trump. So I actually think it's not only a sort of importing of this kind of stuff to Australia, but also, you know, Hanson exporting her kind of content. Certainly the party is really plugged into international networks. Hanson was at Mar-a-Lago quite recently. Previously, as revealed in the Al Jazeera investigation, travelled to the US to meet with supporters in the pro-gun sector there. So certainly the party is connected with like-minded parties and actors around the world, and no doubt is learning things from them in terms of political strategy. I think there is a tendency to think that one nation is just following where other parties are leading, but I don't think that's quite the case. I think actually one nation is kind of leading some of the innovation, for lack of a better word, in this space for how far-right populist parties are campaigning and trying to convey their messages, particularly online.
You're deeper in far-right circles than most of us are for your work. When one of these scandals blows up, like take, for example, when Pauline Hanson the other day made comments that there are no good Muslims, what do you see people talking about and saying about it? I mean, she's then attacked in mainstream media, but how does that actually play out among her base?
They like it, is the short answer. As One Nation would put it, she's saying what they think. She's not afraid to sort of say the common sense things. And that's so much of, I guess, One Nation's pitch is that they're talking common sense, they're cutting through the sort of technocratic bubble of Canberra, as they would put it. They're closer to the thoughts and feelings and needs and wants of so-called ordinary Australians, and they're the only ones that have the courage to speak for them. So when Hanson says something that is so extraordinarily and deliberately provocative and inflammatory, it's not an issue for her and her supporters.
Do you reckon there's a One Nation without Pauline Hanson?
Be interested to see it. I mean, when Hanson left the party and prior to her return in 2014, it was politically irrelevant. It was electorally irrelevant. So can the party exist without her? Yeah, it can continue as a, legal entity. Can it be electorally successful or attract the same levels of media attention and potentially translate that into seats? In the past, no, but maybe it can moving forward. And I think certainly the party is starting to think about what life after Hanson looks like. I mean, I don't think Hanson's going anywhere anytime soon, but eventually she'll retire or lose her seat. What happens then? Who's that successor going to be? Is it going to be James Ashby? Is it going to be Hanson's daughter, Lee Hanson? Is it going to be Barnaby Joyce?
Former Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce has joined One Nation after leaving the Nationals in the final sitting
We
week of
don't know. I think the party is really quite clearly thinking about this, and we can see this even just in their intent to change the registered name with the Electoral Commission from Pauline Hanson's One Nation to just One Nation. One Nation is not a fringe party, right? Even before its polling spike, it is a fairly persistent and largely ordinary feature of Australian politics today. And it's certainly not treated as fringe by the major parties, by the ALP and the coalition parties. We saw in the recent South Australian state election that the Liberals decided to preference One Nation ahead of Labor on their how to vote cards, despite One Nation not reciprocating and running open how to votes. We can't see One Nation as some aberration or fringe or just protest party, right? It's being treated by its competitors as a sort of ordinary part of the political ecosystem now.
So, Jordan, if this is a party that's thriving on scandals, that's strategically seeking out scandals rather than being brought down by them, what, if anything, do you reckon will be the undoing of One Nation?
Well, I think in a weird way, I actually think it will be Hanson. I think Hanson is simultaneously the reason for the party's success, and she's also, in a way, its biggest weakness. And that's both in terms of, I guess, the organisational implications, not only in terms of leadership renewal and where the party goes forward, but also historically because of how centralised and hierarchical the party is. So can Hanson change her management style to work more collegially with her colleagues to prevent those kind of splits and defections? We'll have to wait and see. But I do think that while Hanson is the selling point of One Nation, I think she also is its greatest risk and its Achilles heel in many ways.
Jordan, thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
In the next episode, we turn the lens on the media, from Brekkie TV...
Pauline, good morning to you.
...to Dancing with the Stars. How culpable is the press in the making of One Nation? That's next week. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss an episode. And if you're feeling really kind, leave us a review. It helps others find the show too. You can read more from Jordan McSweeney at The Conversation. This episode was produced by Isabella Podwinski. Sound design by Michelle Macklem. Our head of editorial innovation is me, Ashlyn McGee. Misha Ketchell is the editor of The Conversation Australia. A special thanks to our colleagues Gemma Ware, Justin Bergman and Amanda Dunn for their ideas and wisdom. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organisation, and you can sign up to our free daily newsletter by clicking the link in our show notes. You can also listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.